start to talk about PGPUK, I'm actually going to broaden it a little bit and talk about some of the other projects that Stephan mentioned as well. There isn't a consensus, so I'm disagreeing with the first point that there's a consensus about the future. This is a statement from George Church, who's the principal investigator of the PGP, who's PGP1 in the US, whose vision is that someday we will have a complete pedigree of the entire human population, and everyone will be connected to everybody else on a huge family tree that looks like Google Maps. If you look at the PGPUK press release that they made on the day of their launch, the sponsorship is coming from the sequencing companies, from BGI, Illumina, Life Technologies and Personalis. So this is about market creation for this technology. So the question I'm going to ask is around whether that is in the public interest. But I'm not going to focus purely on the PGP. This is an article from the Times in 2009 with Jay Flatley, the chief executive of Illumina, advocating genetic mapping of babies at birth, so way before the age of 21, that you heard about. And the context of this article you may not be familiar with, because it involved a provision proposed from the government, from the previous government under New Labour, to allow data sharing without consent on a vast scale. That was hidden in something, clause 152 of the Coroners and Justice Bill, and it was dropped within about a week of publication due to uproar from privacy groups and so on. But the general public, it hadn't quite taken off, so the general public are largely unaware that this proposal was made way back then based on a report co-authored by Sir Mark Walpert, then head of the Wellcome Trust and now, of course, chief scientist. So this idea is very much underlying some of the policy decisions being taken in the UK. So there are some assumptions underlying the Personal Genome Project. Sequencing the whole genome of every individual is fundamental to the future of medicine in their view, and widespread sharing of that data is therefore essential to medical progress. And they also, as you've heard, admit that privacy can't be guaranteed if this is the case. So I certainly agree with the third point. Other pilot projects you've heard about, the 100,000 Genomes Project. The current focus of that project is on the areas that I would argue are most likely to be of benefit, such as undiagnosed genetic disorders and some cancer genomes. But the consent forms require very broad consent. So if, as a mother with a child with a genetic disorder, you agree to having the sequence done to try and identify the cause, you are also at the same time signing broad consent for that data to be shared for medical research with companies and for purposes that you don't know about, provided it's within the broad field of health research. You have similarly broad consent within UK Biobank, but it's worth remembering that UK Biobank only recruited about 7% of those asked, and I've never seen that figure in writing, but I've heard that at conferences where it has been discussed. So this is actually the UK government's view of what will happen here in the future. It comes from a presentation by Tim Hubbard of the Wellcome Trust Sanger Centre in February 2012, and this has been endorsed by government, although you may not know about it. It's actually a picture of up to 60 million variant files you'll see over in the box on the left. That means everybody in the UK, although the current focus is now on NHS England, because of course the UK government doesn't have control over health policy in Scotland or Wales anymore. And it's about storing electronic medical records, combining them with genomes, capturing genotype and phenotype, and feeding back risk assessments to individuals at the end of that cycle. So it's something that is envisaged as being applied to all of us in future. And this is not merely theoretical. A recent consultation by BIS is about investing the money or investing the first £1 billion into this structure, this infrastructure. This is Jeremy Hunt, Health Secretary, who told the Telegraph that he was in favour of Britain becoming the first country where every baby would have their DNA tested at birth. So I think we need to look quite broadly at the commercial drivers behind this vision of the future. There's clearly the sequencing market. Illumina is the company that has just won the contract to do the 100,000 genomes, as well as being the one proposing everyone's genome being sequenced, and also one of the companies funding the Personal Genome Project. The big mover behind the scenes is Google. Google has been in secret discussions with the government since at least 2008 about getting access to NHS medical records and potentially genomes in the future. They want to be the company controlling the algorithms which calculate the risks, which the Google-funded company 23andMe already market in the USA, or were marketing till the FDA cracked down on the claims they were making. And that means we're talking about data sharing with companies without specific consent, even within these managed consent models, which are considered as being the future for the whole NHS. I talked about the privacy issues to do with that and the expansion of the drug market and so on, and some of the history behind the Human Genome Project, which was very much based on a very deliberate shift onto biological risk factors and targeting individuals considered at high genetic risk rather than public health measures that would actually crack down on the tobacco industry or the food industry. Is this good for health? I've already told you I don't think it is. It's about the fact genomes are poor predictors of most diseases, that claims aren't substantiated, and that more data isn't necessarily going to improve these kind of predictions, because many of the risks are in the products or in society, not in the people. But this idea is about sinking costs. It's about sequencing the genomes as part of research, publicly subsidized research in public-private partnership, without requiring evidence of benefit to health before the money's spent, and then about investors getting a return on that by personalized marketing. So that's Google's main interest. The main commercial interest is in using these risk assessments to tell people that they're at risk and therefore need to purchase other products, whether it's further tests or treatments or simply further monitoring. And that implies abandoning screening criteria and implies potentially, unlike the PGP, in the government version of the plan, sequencing babies and children without their consent. So the implications for privacy, I think we don't disagree on. It is becoming impossible for medical researchers to guarantee privacy. This is a statement from a meeting organised by Sussex a few years ago, which says very clear it would now be misleading to promise privacy to research participants in exchange for consent to donate samples. So PGPUK is more honest about the privacy implications of the future than the UK government, which under its care.data scheme, which is only about sharing the medical records at the moment, is promising people anonymity and operating on an opt-out basis. So all your medical records under care.data will be shared with approved researchers, likely to include Google, without you actively consenting to anything at all. So that scheme's currently on hold because of controversy about it, but it's not been stopped. But once you add the genomes into that, these are biometrics. They tag the data to the physical person, as I explained before. And the Snowden revelations, for example, have shown that if you put that data in the cloud, then that's accessible by security agencies. Governments and security agencies are interested, but also you have new technologies like rapid DNA technology, which would allow testing at borders to be matched against these databases. So this is the article about Homeland Security in the US, considering these portable instant DNA scanners for use both on the street and at borders. Is it publicly acceptable to operate on the basis of an opt-out only? Well, the BMA have now said, no, you've got to have opt-in for care.data. But the opt-out system's being pushed because of the very small number of people that actually consented to UK biobank. Most people want to be asked. They're supportive of medical research, but they want to be asked. And we've already seen a big loss of trust in the storage of DNA and on the forensic police DNA database when innocent people's records were kept without their consent. There are a lot of policy developments that are very relevant to all these studies at the moment. There's a draft EU data protection regulation which would require specific informed consent for medical research. So Wellcome Trust are actively lobbying against this, and in fact we're lobbying for all pseudo-anonymized data, linked data with the name removed, to be shared without people being specifically informed. We have recent news this week that the UK is looking at pulling out of the European Convention on Human Rights, or at least limiting the role of the court in decisions. That's a key aspect of that. Concerns the decision in the case S and Marple, which ruled that innocent people's DNA couldn't be kept in a police context without people's consent. And we're also seeing lobbying on the EU in vitro diagnostics regulation. So the FDA has cracked down on sales of misleading claims in the US, but there's no equivalent EU regulation. The IVD regulation would attempt to bring some level of regulation, weaker than the US, but some level of regulation to that area and to the claims that companies can make based on the computer algorithms they want to use to predict risk. So my conclusions are that the PGP is one of a number of marketing exercises promoting the whole genome sequencing of healthy people, and it's primarily about creating that market. There's no real evidence that that's going to be a significant benefit to human health. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that there aren't useful medical applications of DNA testing, including whole genome sequencing. I'm talking about a blanket application to healthy people. Privacy will no longer exist if whole populations have their genome sequenced in this way, but the PGP is being more honest than the government about that. And we are seeing active lobbying by both the UK government and commercial lobbyists trying to remove the kind of legal protections that would give people some kind of confidence that they will be asked for their consent, that their privacy will be protected as far as possible, and that misleading risk predictions will not be fed back to individuals.